Famous, also famous, number one, desirable. I do what I want, when I want, and how I want it. Leave you with the one in the air, that's how I roll. I got tons of soul, I'm a true collectible. Famous, also famous, number one, desirable. I do what I want, when I want, and how I want it. Leave you with the one in the air, that's how I roll. I got change to throw, I don't care about no gold. Better, so much better, flipping, incredible. Always on the show, so they know that I still got it. And I never feel sorry, yeah, top of the world. Top of the world, yeah, top of the world, top of the world, yeah, top of the world, top of the world, yeah, top of the world, top of the world, yeah, top of the world. When I hear him come like my fuse and then ba-bum. Later, see you later, I'm about to blow this up. You can sing my song if you want, I know you want it. It's always kinda funny, yeah, cause I know I'm a superstar on the
Hi guys, I'm Si and welcome to Ace Podcast Nation, the home of our original created series, My Story. This is series 2, episode number 3. Ace Podcast Nation, of course, your home to many other great shows and series featuring top guests, expert analysts and more. My Story, like all our other shows and series, available in video format at youtube.com/Ace Podcast Nation. Please do subscribe, click that bell for notifications, and then you get a little text every time we upload or go live with our content or shows or interviews. And of course, you can get the audio versions at the usual podcast and radio platforms. Just search Ace Podcast Nation. There's over 400 shows on various subjects with various guests. But My Stories is a bit unique as we take our guests through their life and career from their upbringing all the way to present day as they share some memories and anecdotes along the way. Series 1 featured actors, footballers, broadcasters, authors and more. And Series 2 will be no different. But the tagline is simple: real conversations with the real people. And my guest today is a best-selling author, an investigative journalist. He's won over 24 journalistic awards, a regular analyst on major TV networks, appeared on Richard and Judy, Newsnight, BBC News, Sky Sports, Setanta, as well as being on TalkSport, BBC 5, BBC Radio 5, Football Focus, the Sunday Supplement, and more. And of course, he has interviewed the great Pele. I am delighted to be joined once again by Mr. Harry Harris. How are you, Harry?
Yes, pleasure to be here, Si.
Indeed, yes, mate. Indeed. So obviously you've been on the channel before where we talked about your book on Emiliano Sala. You came on the football show as well, the live show on the Monday. But today is going to be more about just you and your career, which I'm really excited to do because obviously when we've spoken first, or when you've been on the shows first before, it was very much focused on a particular subject, whether it was a book or breaking news. And I'm sure we'll touch on that a bit later on as well. But what I like to do with these shows is start at the beginning and have you tell us a little bit about kind of where you're from, your childhood, your upbringing. Where did it all begin for Harry Harris?
Yes, let's think. East London, really, where in the old days they used to say that East London in the northeast is where you found a lot of footballers. So I grew up there, not far from the Crays. In fact, I do remember playing in a park opposite Mrs. Cray and kicking a ball into a garden. And I wasn't really wanting to volunteer to go and get it back, but as it was my fault, I had to. I played football in the same street as Barry Silkman, who, as you know, played for Malcolm Ellison at Man City, and Terry Venables at Crystal Palace. I always thought I was much better than he was, but obviously he proved me completely wrong on that score.
Absolutely. So it's obviously that area is that you've grown up in is full of historical characters, and like you've mentioned, the Crays and things like that. That part of London is renowned for people from all different fields. what was your schooling like? Did you go to schools around that area as well?
Well, I went to Davenant Foundation School, which was next to the Salvation Army. I think it's now a college. And then just before sixth form, it moved out to Loughton in Essex. And I liked the school so much that I travelled all the way from East London to Loughton in Essex. Pretty hefty journey, but really enjoyed it, and ended up captain of my school football team. And in the lower sixth, a year older than me, I was playing in goal, actually. And in that team was Dennis Rope, who played fullback, and Terry Brisley, who played in midfield.
Wow.
And I had a Tottenham scout came to watch me, but I was so bad that they picked out Dennis Rope and Terry Brisley and wanted to sign them.
No, there we go. So was playing football something which you sort of carried on then after school and stuff like that, or did it kind of stop there?
No. I really was interested in journalism as an alternative, because I just couldn't believe, after all the money I spent on season tickets watching at the old White Hart Lane, that someone would actually pay me to go and watch football. I thought that was quite intriguing. But obviously you have to start off at the bottom. So I was forever popping into the local, in those days you had a little local branch of the local paper in the High Road, and taking them in a picture and a little article about school sports day, school's prize giving day. And when it came to leaving school, it was almost like I turned up and they thought, oh, here he is, you might as well have a desk. I became quite well known in that little branch. But I could have gone to university, but the group paper gave me an apprenticeship. And part of that was I could go to Harlow College on a block release for 3 months, twice, 2 blocks, 3 months in 2 years, as well as have the job, which I thought was perfect. And off I went to learn the trade, to learn the things that journalists no longer need. Maybe you think they still do, but shorthand is of no consequence anymore. Touch typing, I still think touch typing is a great asset, rather than plodding around with 2 fingers. I taught myself to touch type, and at Harlow picked up, shorthand speed of 120 to 150 words a minute, which I can still use,
Yeah.
It was quite good. I played in the Harlow College team, and it was great fun. I enjoyed it there.
Was it like journalism and media? Was that something which, from a very early age, you had an interest in, or was it more it sort of developed in your teenage years?
No, I always thought if I wasn't good enough, which I wasn't, to play professional football, it would be fantastic to have a life following football and writing about football. But before that, obviously, the local paper, it was down to the local priest to see what was going on there in the parish, and the fire station, the local police station. There was so little happening in Loughton High Road that one day someone said to me, well, what we're going to write about in this week's paper? No idea. He said, I'll tell you what, take a ladder, put it outside our front door, and do a survey about how superstitious they are in Loughton. Who walks under the ladder and who walks around it?
You like that?
And I've never forgotten that, because it was just so hilarious.
Yeah, I when I was probably, I must have been about 10, I reckon. I was keen footballer, and I think it must have been like a rainy day, and I must have said something about writing about football or journalism to my father, and I'm still not sure whether he told me to do this because he wanted me out the way and to be quiet, or whether he was legitimately trying to guide me. But he said, oh, right, go and watch the football, which I would have done anyway. But he said, take a pen and paper, make notes, and then write a story about the game. I did it and I loved it. But I'm still not sure whether, like I say, he was trying to get me out of the way, or whether he was, trying to guide me towards it. But unfortunately for me, anyway, I lost my way a bit in my teenage years and never really pursued it. But I'm very interested in journalism, and I look at some of the accomplishments which you've had, along your career, and some of the people you've had the pleasure of interviewing, the books you've written. It's very, very storied. So obviously we're not going to be able to cover every single little bit, but we'll do our best to get as much in as possible. So you were in the small branch. Where did you sort of progress from there?
Well, it was quite funny, really, because while I was at the college, the local paper closed. I think it shut down, and that left me in a peculiar state. I was still kind of like being paid off while I was still at college. But I got a position on another local paper, the North London Weekly Herald Group. And that was my dream come true, because it was in Tottenham High Road. It was 500 yards from White Hart Lane. It was actually closer to White Hart Lane than the actual stadium, because White Hart Lane is some distance from the ground. And I started off really in that little branch, because it was another situation where there was a small branch in Tottenham High Road. But the paper covered Arsenal, and it covered Tottenham, and all the junior and reserve teams. I was there, obviously, just arrived fresh from college. So I started off on news, a bit of news gathering. But these papers were a stepping stone for certainly the London Evening News or Standard, or the national papers. And the guy who was on sport left and obviously moved on to actually to I think it was a Reading evening paper, but certainly much bigger than the local papers. And everyone just said, well, who's going to be the sports editor? Anyone fancy the job? I put my hand up, and I've only been there 3 months. And before I knew it, I was a sports editor.
Wow. So I'm intrigued. Obviously, when you make that jump after that, from the local papers up to a more sort of national or a bigger platform, if you like, do they approach you, or do you kind of apply for the job? I'm interested in how it works within the journalism world, because you do see, even these days, you see journalists sort of going from one platform to another quite regularly. So how does that work? Is it like a normal 9-to-5 job? If you want a new job, 9 times out of 10, you've got to go and apply for it and interview for it and things like that. Whereas maybe more in the football world, it tends to be another company approaches the player or the member of staff to try and, get them involved or make the move. Is it similar in journalism, or is it probably a mix of the two?
No, I think it's almost like acting. How do you become a Hollywood superstar from doing repertory work on the stage around the country? How does that happen? So it really is. When my history teacher sort of doubled up as a careers teacher at school, and when I told him, well, look, I've fluffed it as a footballer, I'm not going to make that. I'd like to be a football writer. He looked at me. He was a very stern man, so he didn't laugh. He just looked at me as if I was raging mad, and said, "You've got no chance." So I would say there is virtually no chance of making that grade up, because so very few are going to do that. So how I went about it was acquainting myself with a guy called Victor Alton, who was a specialist in news gathering on the London Evening News. And what I did is I contacted him, and I supplied him at the end of each week on my local paper with the stories that emerged in my local paper. So I wasn't giving away trade secrets. I just gave him the stories from the local paper, and he used them invariably in each column. Because on that local paper, I became very, very close to Bill Nicholson, the manager, and very few, if any, journalists did. And I remember when the guy who was leaving as sports editor took me in to see Bill and said, "Here's my replacement. I'd like you to meet Harry. And Bill Nicholson looked at me and said, well, what would be your requirements now on the local paper? You're covering Spurs and you're the sports editor. What would you like to do? I said, well, it'd be good to come in once a week, so every Monday, to speak to you, to get an inside track on what's happening. And then I can write my report with a bit of information from you, et cetera, et cetera. And my predecessor looked at Bill Nicholson and they looked at me, and I thought, what's going on here? They think I'm mad. And Bill Nicholson said, your predecessor saw me once a year, not once a week.
Wow. Of course, you
he said to me, well, look, he said, start off when the season starts, come in on the Monday, we'll see how we go. He saw me every single Monday.
Wow.
All the 7 years I was there.
That's impressive, that because I can't imagine many guys were giving up that time for journalists, on a weekly basis. Do you know what I mean? That's I think that's a big thing. And obviously you wrote about Bill Nicholson. You wrote a book, I believe, wasn't it? The Boss is partially on Bill Nicholson. You've written so many books. It's hard to kind of keep track of them. There's so many. I was just looking at them then just before we started chatting, and there's just it's a long list of some huge names. Was
only 80 books, so not many.
Is it?
Only 80.
80, Jesus, that's a lot of books. And the thing is, there's some huge names which you've written about. Was at that early stage of your kind of journalistic career, was writing a book an aim at that point, or was that something which hadn't crossed your mind yet?
No, in fact, while I was still in the local paper, I wrote my first book with the Spurs physio at the time, Mike Varney. It was called The Treatment of Football Injuries.
Okay.
And I interviewed all sorts of people, including the England captain at the time, Jerry Francis, about how he had acupuncture treatment on his back. And it was quite, everyone thought at the time, an interesting book, because it wasn't just about the physio's treatment of the injuries, which we adapted for Sunday morning players so it could be popular, but the kind of developments in medicine that some of the leading players were trying to alleviate their injuries in a period where we're completely unlike it is today. You don't have that kind of advancement where, at those days, if you broke your leg, it could be a career-threatening, if not career-ending injury. If you had a bad ligament or cartilage injury, invariably you would never play again, or wouldn't be anywhere near the same again. So players were turning to a variety of different methods to try and get themselves into a condition which now we take for granted.
Of course, I was going to say, like you mentioned acupuncture there for Jerry Francis. That is something which even now not everybody would look to. So I think back then that would have been almost unheard of as a treatment. So I found that fascinating. So that was your first book. When obviously you were speaking to Bill Nicholson on a regular basis, when do you feel, from a personal point of view, that your journalistic career really started to take off in the direction that you wanted it to?
Well, I mean, not just the local paper, but the national papers took an interest in me. So they were aware of what I was writing in the local paper was from a point of authority. It wasn't just what the local papers would normally do. They could see that I had the inside track, but I would take that Northumberland Weekly Herald paper to the club, published every Friday. I would take it in on Thursday afternoon, and I would distribute it, because my idea was it would be respected journalism, approved journalism. It would be something that I wanted people to see what I was doing, that they would feel comfortable to provide me with the inside track. So I think I've become reasonably well known within Fleet Street at that point. I then moved up for personal reasons to the Journal in Newcastle, which was part of the group that I was with anyway, and I spent a year there. They gave me non-league football to cover, Spennymoor, Blythe Spartans, and I don't know whether it was me, but that year Blythe Spartans reached the FA Cup quarter-finals. At least they were in the draw, and they drew Arsenal, but they had to beat Wrexham in the replay. And in the first game at Wrexham, they were winning and going through, and Wrexham got a last-minute corner. They took the corner, and they had a little goalkeeper, an ex-Newcastle goalkeeper, and he caught it somehow, and that should have been the end of the game. Whistle should have blown, end of the game. The linesman was waving furiously. The corner flag had fallen over because it was very windy in Wrexham.
No.
And he insisted the corner was taken again. To the far post, centre half, equaliser.
Yeah.
So I was covering Blythe. The replay had to be moved to St James's Park. There was such interest. It was the year that Newcastle were relegated. No one could be bothered to go to St James's Park by the end of the season. But at this stage, there was something like 20,000 people locked out of the stadium.
Jeez.
It was that big. So little old me, who started off covering Spennymoor and Blythe Spartans with 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, 10 paragraphs, 15 paragraphs. I had the front page, the back page. It was unbelievable. And then I got a call from the Evening News. Poor old Vic Roughton, 6 months earlier, had died from a heart attack walking up a slope. He wasn't very fit. And they asked me to come and replace him.
Wow. So it seems like you mentioned there about you used to distribute the paper, and because you wanted your work to your journalism to be respected. And I think journalists on the whole in the UK in 2021 and over the last probably 10 years or so, they get a lot of criticism, and rightly so in some cases, for some of the things which are printed and stuff. And I think one thing which has come across to me with our conversations, both on and off the shows we've done, but also reading your books and reading your articles, is everything which you say and write is with authority and is factual, and you have got that insight into what you're talking about or what you're writing about. And I feel like more, how can I put this without upsetting people? I wish more journalists coming in, like the young journalists coming into it, would look at people like yourself, see how you operate and how you work, and do the same, or or at least base their what can I say, like their work morals on it. Because I look at some of the work you've done over the years, and I look at some of the work which comes out more recently, and it is different. It's a different world in 2021 because you also have, you've got the internet, and anyone can print anything, can't they? But yeah, it frustrates me sometimes when I read the newspapers. But like I said, I always enjoy your work, and I always enjoy your books because I know that they've been fully researched. Is that something which you look back on with pride, that the amount of work which you put into your books or your articles, like everything is fully researched and factual? Like that must be something which is you can look back on with pride.
Well, yes, indeed. But I really think the whole situation, the whole world has changed from when I started. There's no mobile phone, and in those days, look, if you compare it to today, everything is controlled. It's controlled by the big clubs. It's controlled by Premier League, the FA, in the way they handle journalists. In my day, it was very rare you had a head of communications and a media department. Now you've got dozens of people in the media departments. So when I was working, I had the manager's personal home telephone number, not his mobile, obviously, but his home telephone number. And if I wanted to check anything, I'd ask him. I'd just ring him up and ask him. I can't imagine that happens today. And most of the star players, I'd have their personal home numbers. But today, you sit in a big auditorium. It's all sorted out for you. You speak to the manager along with everybody else in a controlled environment. A player might come in, and that's in a controlled environment. There wasn't so many controls in my time. You were able to go your own way if you wished.
Yeah,
that's restricted now. It's a different kind of journalism, totally.
So I've got two questions which are kind of the same, but for different eras. So obviously, first and foremost, you mentioned back in the day, obviously there was no mobile phones. I can imagine, or I can't imagine, I suppose I should say, being a journalist without having a mobile phone must have been a very different and difficult world. But also in 2021, you must find that frustrating to not be able to just give a manager or a player a call to say, check something, whatever it may be. Like, that's a very different world. Does that also make it quite difficult to do things the way you'd like?
No, because I still have managers' home telephone numbers and players' home telephone numbers, or their personal mobiles now. So
yeah.
No one bothered them on the landline. I'm not sure anyone has a landline.
No.
But no, I have the managers' mobiles and their emails, and we text them. So I do still keep a personal contact with people. Yeah.
What about how different was it being a journalist pre-mobile phones and internet? Because obviously these days you can send things, articles, instantly, texts, whatever it may be. You couldn't do that earlier in your career.
No, I've got a couple of amusing stories about that. One was in Albania, which is quite interesting because England are playing Albania, as we know, in the World Cup qualifier. And I went to Albania before the England squad went. And how I got the visa is a story on its own, but I got a visa in a very peculiar manner. I had to go to Paris to the only Albanian embassy in Europe, and I got the invite through Robert Maxwell, who was obviously the proprietor of the Mirror, and I was on the Mirror, and his contacts throughout certainly Eastern Europe, but the world was just phenomenal. So this was set up for me, and I went with Monty Fresco when we got the visa, and we went to Albania long before any foreign journalists or any foreigners had gone to Albania. It was peculiar. But of course, there's no phones at all. And when we actually got to Albania as a media corps, there was two hotels in the opposite ends of the square. One was taken up by the England team, one was by the media. When I went there previously, I was in the England media team. But I shared with Colin Gibson, the Daily Telegraph, because you had to share the rooms. There were so few rooms in this tiny hotel, very basic. And of course, we got into our room and there's a telephone on the desk. And we went, well, that's not bad, telephone. I said, no. I said, Colin, look, I came here to do a recce. You try it, doesn't work. No connection. There was no connections to any of the phones in any of the rooms. The only connection to the outside world was a telephonist downstairs in the basement, and that was the only connection. So you would try and book a call to the office to follow your story, and you could wait hours, literally hours, for your turn, if indeed ever came through. So there was one day the phone rang. We were getting a call through, and Colin had popped out, I don't know, get a couple of beers, and I was in the shower. But you needed to get to that call because that was your only chance of getting out to the outside world. So I rushed out. I slipped on the mat. I went head over heels and ended upside down in the wardrobe. And Colin came in and said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "I was trying to answer the phone." Of course I didn't. We lost our connection.
Yeah, it's a very, very different
How simple
world.
to have a mobile, wouldn't it? To have a mobile in those days would be wonderful.
Oh, yes. So how did you, if you were doing, say you were at a match just doing a match report and you were watching the match, how would you get your report to the paper or whatnot, like post match?
Telephone.
So you just phone it through.
Yeah.
Well,
and back in those days, you had copy takers who would just sit there and typing it all out as you dictated it.
Amazing. That's
then you had a computer. That was a landline, and you plugged your computer in, and then you typed it in, and it went through your computer. Tandies were the first ones, and those connections were a bugger.
Oh yeah. It's
so it was a test of your initiative to actually get your story from A to B.
Absolutely. I find it fascinating, because you've witnessed the change in technology, as you've been going along your career. I'm assuming it's a lot easier now to do such things because you can just email it and stuff. So do you miss kind of those days of, where there was not media teams and all these different things? It was more personal with footballers and managers, and I know you can still you still speak to them and you can still contact them, but as you mentioned, like back then there wasn't so many people between you as a journalist and the managers or the players or whoever it may be.
Look, I hope I'm not going to sound like one of these old files who says, in my day it was so wonderful, but it wasn't wonderful. It was more than that. It was a way of life. It was just an incredible time to be a journalist, particularly a football writer. You were part of the whole. You weren't outside looking in, trying to find the solutions or the answers and to report what you're looking at. You were part of what was happening. You travelled with the England team or the football club. You were on the same plane. The football clubs used the papers of those days to part, if not whole, finance their journeys, because the press paid to be on that plane, to be part of it. So you would stand at the carousel with the luggage going round, standing next to whoever it might be, Kevin Keeper, Alan Shearer, whoever it might be, and stand there and have a chat, and collect your luggage, and then off you go. Or you'd be come down in the lift, and you're coming out, and they're coming in. You say, how are you doing? What's up? And they go, oh, my bloody leg, I don't think I'll make it tomorrow. And you'd get an injury story, personally speaking to people, knowing people. And you would keep an awful lot of secrets. You would, because there wasn't this profusion of the media, it was just you as the chief football writer, not news reporters or loads of other different reporters. If something happened and you were there to witness it by chance, you probably wouldn't report it. Yeah, and I can tell you a number of stories about that, but they're all very amusing. But I think it was a golden age, in my view, to be a football writer and to be in the middle of it.
Absolutely, it sounds incredible. It sounds a lot more personal than what perhaps football writers would do today. Like I said, with the communication teams and things like that. With regards to your books, you mentioned you've written 80 of them. Do you have a favourite?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I've written books with or about Pele, George Best, Rod Gullit, Glenn Hoddle, and it does really make me feel certainly pride to have been involved personally with people who were what I'd consider among the world's greatest ever players of their generation. And to be so personally involved with them, some of the stories that emerge as a consequence of that were far better than the books, I've got to tell you. Really, you could not make it up.
You've written some massive names. Excuse me, sorry. Of course, I believe you interviewed Pele, didn't you?
Well, I mean, I was on holiday in La Manga. I mean, it was a favourite venue because the England teams went there, clubs went there. I spent so much time there. I decided to go on holiday there, and I took a book with me about Brazilian football, and I was reading it, and it just struck me there was so little about Pele in it, and I thought, well, that can't be right. You know, he's the world's greatest ever player, and there's so little to read about. And I thought, well, I can't. In those days, I had a literary agent, as you do. Don't anymore, don't need one. But I rang him up and I just said, look, I'd like to write a book about Pele. And he said to me, oh, there must be literally hundreds of Pele books that he's written, people have written about him. He said, I'll do some research. In those days, still no mobile, so I couldn't do the research. He said, I'll do some research and I'll come back to you. He rang me the next day. He said, I can't believe it. There's only one book on Pele. It was an autobiography he wrote in 1974, just at the point of his retirement, although he did come back to play for Cosmos. So, and it was written by a Portuguese journalist in Portuguese and translated into English. So you can imagine the quality of the English version.
Yeah.
And he just said, well, you know, if you can write a book about Pele. So I said, well, I'll think about it. And I went next time I saw him, and I saw him quite frequently, because in those days you did see people. You know, I went to, you know, you knew people in, you know, the sponsors or people involved in the world game, and they saw you as representatives of England. So I was invited to all sorts of things, like a lunch with the world's journalists to meet Bobby Charlton and Pele, and sit next to them, chat to them.
Wow.
The sponsors took me out to Rio to meet him, to do an interview with him. Obviously, you plug Umbro and the shirts and everything else. He signed numerous shirts, and he signed 2 or 3 to me. The sponsors took me to Frankfurt for a breakfast meeting with Pele. He was doing a promotional thing there, and I took some pictures. They took some pictures of me and Pele at that promotional event, and I interviewed him over breakfast. So next time I saw him, and I think it may have been in Japan, I had my place booked in the queue of world journalists, and got to see him, did my interview. And at the end of it, I said, look, you know, I'd like to write a book about you, but I'm not going to do it unless you agree to you know, the fact that I'll be writing about it. And as you know me so well, it will be, I think, very positive, because, you know, I think that's the way I'd like to write the book. He looked at me as if I was mad, and he got up. So I got up, and he gave me a great big hug, and he said, I can't believe anyone would want to write a book about me.
Wow, that's incredible. It really is.
He was at that time, he'd been going through a little dip in his popularity. He'd come out of politics in Brazil. He wasn't popular in Brazil for a period. He had conflict with FIFA, and he, for the first time ever, hadn't been involved in the World Cup draw. And he probably felt as though he was on a little decline. I don't know, but he gave me an interview, several interviews for the book. I spoke to several of the 1970 World Cup winning team when I was in Rio, interviewed them, and interviewed numerous people about him. And that book came out many, many years ago, and only last year was actually printed in Vietnam, in Vietnamese.
Wow.
And it's the only book I've ever had in Vietnam. So there you go. It's been everywhere. Been reprinted in America, American versions of it. It's been reprinted all over the world.
Incredible. This really is incredible. Like, Pele to me he's so iconic, and I struggle to imagine him like being surprised that someone wants to write a book about him, simply because he's so iconic in my eyes. But I've always, everything I've ever read about him is that he's a very humble man. He's you know, there's no sort of ego to him or anything like that. He's a very nice gentleman. And it sounds like your experiences with him were very much along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think I told him at the time, I brought, when I saw him after the book was published, well, in fact, I sent him the book or to his agents and said, I want you to read it before it's published. Please tell me if there's anything in that book you think that's not right, or I'll change it. And they came back with half a dozen corrections, no more than that, on factual things.
Yeah.
And then I saw him and had photographs taken with the book, gave him a copy of the book. He didn't quite ask me to sign his book, but I asked him to sign my book, which I've got. And I told him at the time, I said, look, this is a fantastic story. Your life story is unbelievable. And I think I've got a good insight into it by interviewing you and about various things and people about you. And I said, it won't be long before someone wants to write your actual autobiography. And of course, I think 2 years later, he was commissioned and paid an absolute fortune to do his autobiography. I also was involved in an opus book about Pele.
Okay.
And that was about 10 years ago. Those books were selling at thousands of pounds then. And I've got a copy. Part of my fee, most of my fee was a copy. I can't imagine there's many of those left in the world.
No, I wouldn't imagine so. Have you still got the shirts that he signed for you?
I still have on my wall. Let's see if you can see them.
Oh, well, there's some shirts. Talk us through those shirts then, Harry.
That one there, I think you can see.
Yeah. What's the England number 7? What's that one?
Oh, have a guess at the England number 7. That's David Beckham's England captain shirt he gave me.
Amazing. Is the one, I know I'm kind of skipping between books and journalism, but it's all part of, your story, really. I was wondering, with the journalism side of things, or I suppose the books as well, has anyone ever been kind of upset by anything that you've written or a story you've written or anything like that, and kind of phoned you up and said, why have you written that, along those sort of lines? You don't necessarily have to name names if you don't want to. Obviously, you can if you want to, but I just wondered, that must be part and parcel of being a journalist.
Well, after 35 years, 40 years of writing articles, so I can't imagine how many there'd be. I'd like to say no, but I think you'd really need another hour, another program to go through that list of people. Frag me up, give me a bollocking.
It's human nature, though, isn't it? Like, if people, like when people see something about themselves, which maybe is not positive, this human nature to sort of want to defend yourself, I guess is the word. You've obviously
it goes beyond that side, because you right at the beginning you talked about my prowess of being an investigative journalist, as well as whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
You do a big investigation, and I did into numerous people, into Terry Venables, and the amount of abuse I got at the time. Good job there wasn't social media at that time.
Yeah.
Going to a match, the dog's abuse that I was getting by supporting Alan Sugar against Terry Venables, in my belief, having done the investigation about the wrongdoing that was involved. And of course, as a consequence of that, Terry Venables got a 9-year ban of being a company director for 11 criminal offences.
Was that difficult as a Tottenham fan as well to do that investigation, or was it were you able to sort of separate that from your love of the football club and just a purely, you're just doing your job and the investigation goes where it goes as such?
Indeed. And so you could imagine dear old Terry Venables, who I still swear to this day I've got no grievance against, but he obviously imagined that I had a massive grievance against him. So you can imagine his reaction. I did a big investigation into Chelsea and their illegal loans and how they were buying players' houses at inflated prices to encourage them to move to the Stamford Bridge. And at that time, they got a record Football League fine. What do you think old Ken Bates said to me?
Yeah, doubt he was too happy with you, was he?
No, so I was banned from Stamford Bridge for a while. Well, banned from Stamford Bridge, and it's great. The Daily Mirror took a picture of me outside, the bars of the gates, can't get in. And Ken Bates loved taking the piss, so he named the press bar loo Harry's bar. But after a couple of years, the rift was healed. It's a long story how it was healed. And the ban was lifted, and I came back for the first game of the season. And I walked through the press room doors, and then you could hear a pin drop. And I thought, what's going on here? All the clatter from all the journalists in there, they all stopped as I walked through the door. And then, at the corner of my eye, I could see Ken Bates. And I thought, what's he doing in the press room before a match? And all the journalists have gone quiet. They're sunning up. He made a big announcement and presented me with the placard, Harry's Bar from the Loo, which I still have. Let me see if I can find it for you.
Amazing. That's incredible. That is. I love that. I really like that. I like I like people like you've got a sense of humor, even maybe when their feelings are hurt or they're a bit annoyed, you can still laugh about these things. And particularly, obviously you healed the rift afterwards. You mentioned obviously you did an investigation into Terry Venables. I believe you also did one into kind of FIFA corruption as well. Is that correct?
I wasn't the leading one who did that, no.
Okay.
That was the Sunday Times, but
yeah.
I wish I had. I did investigations into plenty corruption in English football, and was very popular for that.
No, I was going to say that must do, when you're investigating things like that, which could affect multiple clubs or the league generally. I can't imagine that you're particularly popular at that time, particularly at the height of the sort of investigation or the publicity of it. Like, you must be a fairly unpopular face within those football clubs.
For a time, but only for the people involved. But it's really a question of degree, really. I mean, I remember doing an investigation about Chesterfield. And I can't even remember what it was about, but it was obviously it made headline news. And I remember the players had T-shirts made, which they, after the last game of the season, they all lifted their shirts, and underneath it read, "We hate Harry Harris." Wow. I don't even remember what the investigation was about, because there's been so many, but of course it was proved to be correct and and justifiable. But they didn't. You don't, when you're the victim of it, you don't see it at the time.
Indeed, yeah. And obviously we've talked about before on previous shows about the book you wrote about Emiliano Sala and his death. So I don't
know from personal experience. Look at the dog's abuse I took when that book first came out.
Oh God, yeah.
Why did you call it the title of the book, the content of the book? Where are you going with it? Why, all the Cardiff fans who were having a go at their own club for not having the integrity to pay up on the fee, and here we are, more than 2 years afterwards. Who in their right mind would have paid that fee?
Yeah,
knowing what we know now and what we're going to know very shortly, why would you pay that fee?
Absolutely. And I think when that book came out is when I first contacted you, and I kind of said, look, I would like to, have a chat about the book, and then we had a little chat beforehand and stuff, and then we chatted about the book. One of the things which struck me about that book is, look, there's a lot of things in that book which really shocked me about the people involved and some of their actions. and they upset me, and they anger me to this day. But one of my favorite parts of that book, if there can be a favorite part of a book which is about something so tragic, is the initial sort of opening portion of the book, where you talk about Emiliano Sala as a person, his upbringing, and his kind of family life, if you like. And to me, straight away, that painted a picture that this was a book which was not designed to necessarily, it wasn't designed to cause any damage or hurt the family or upset the family or anything like that. It was going to be about exposing things which had happened and getting to the truth. And I do feel that eventually, when all of the truth comes out about what has gone on and what has happened, that your book and your reports will be a big part of that, because I do feel like it's kind of been forgotten about a little bit by certain parts of the media, particularly.
It's well worth reading all over again, because even last week I was involved in a social media spat with someone, obviously from France, sounded like a Nantes supporter to me, and was giving me almighty stick about the content of the book and what my stance on all this, and he was still banging on about how Nantes were the injured party and that Cardiff should be paying up on the transfer fee, and here's a picture of the player signing his contract. It had been authorised by FIFA level, and you're telling me that the Premier League didn't authorise it. You're talking about FIFA against the Premier League. Clearly, you would take the side of FIFA. And I said, and I replied to him, really, FIFA? And you just mentioned the investigation into FIFA, not by me, by the Sunday Times, and the amount of corruption. And even this week, a second 8-year ban for Blatter and one of his cohorts. A second 8-year stint. Incredible. He's only just finishing the first.
No,
and someone's got the nerve to tell me that what happens at FIFA is
gospel.
Is absolute gospel. And the integrity lies with them. So I said to him, really, if that's the line you're going through, I can't really continue the conversation.
Yeah, it does. That's not the hill that I'd be wanting to go to. Yeah, and one of the books which I'm looking forward to reading, I haven't read yet, is the one on Maradona, which you wrote. Tell me a little bit about that one, because obviously been widely celebrated after his death in the last year or so. What was that book like to read, and did you ever get to interview Diego Maradona?
Well, the reason I wrote the book was because, there's been so many books written about him, but I didn't want to, you don't really want to boast about these things, but how many journalists around the world have actually sat down for an hour or so and spoken to him at great length? How many British journalists have ever done that? There might have been a group in these control situations where a group of people may have spoken to him for 5 minutes or 2 minutes. But how many people have actually sat down with him and spoken to him at great length, a one-to-one interview? So, I'm not saying I knew him profoundly, but
no, of course.
And that happened when he came over to London prior to the World Cup, where the infamous World Cup of his hand of God goal. It was only 3 months before that. He came over to England to play in Ozzy Ardiles' testimonial. And the Argentinian manager said to him, they were playing, I think it was maybe in Switzerland, something like that. And the next friendly warm-up game was in Israel. So they were going from the European friendly match straight on a plane off to Israel. And he said, no, I'm not coming with you. I'm going to London. What? He said, we're preparing for a World Cup. We've got friendly here to prepare, and then we're going off to Israel to prepare. And you're in the squad, you're coming with me. He said, no, I'm going to London. He said, you can't do it. He said, I'm off. And off he went. played in the game, and then the next day went off to Israel, met up with them in Israel. Can you imagine that ever happening? Yeah. Anyway, long and the short of it is, I love little Ozzy, and I've been friends with him for an awful long time. And back then, I just said to him, look, I want to do an exclusive interview with Diego for the Daily Mirror. A lot of humming and hawing, but he said, look, turn up at the hotel around about 2, because we're leaving about 4. And, you know, you might get half an hour with him. I'll sort that out for you. So I turned up at 2 with a photographer, and we sat there. 3 o'clock, nothing happened. 4 o'clock, nothing happened. I said, what's going on? He said, I don't know. He said, I can't ring. He's taken his phone off the hook. He usually likes to sleep, and I think he's travelled from this friendly match, and he's tired. He's having a sleep. And I can't get to him. And he said, but we've got to get to the ground for the game. He said, I'm a bit worried. You know, we're going to leave for 5 o'clock, still no sign of him. I said, what's he want? He said to me, in very colourful English, you can as well, because there's no time for any interviews. That's it. I said, Ozzy, I'm going to lose my job. I wasn't going to. I said, Ozzy, I could lose my job. We've got back page, spread inside, another spread, on this great exclusive interview with Diego Maradona that he promised me. Now you're telling me to bugger off. He said, well, there's no chance. Anyway, 5:30, and don't forget, it's got to be from central London to North London to play in this match. 5:30. Suddenly, the lift burst open. Out of it came 40 people. You know that old thing about how many people can you get in a Mini? Well, it was how many people can you get in a lift? Because I've never seen so many come. Out came Diego, his wife, his manager, his masseur, his entourage, his friends. Everyone was going out. They poured all at once, and he's right. Off we go. I said, Ozzy. He said, picture. Picture. I said, oh, come on, picture. No, Ozzy took us outside the hotel, lined us up, and I still have the picture. I can show you it here. Outside the hotel, me and my youth, Diego's first wife, and Ozzy. And then he said, right, off you go. I said, no, what about the There's no time. We aren't going to make the kickoff. So he said, come on. So he got in his car. Diego got in the passengers, in the seat next to Ozzy, who was driving. I got in the back seat. And we set off in the car, driving to the game. And I asked for an hour all the questions I wanted to, and Ozzy translated, and I'm sitting there taking all the notes. And we get into Seven Sisters Road. Have you ever been in the Seven Sisters Road, the old White Hart Lane days, a half hour before kickoff? Bumper to bumper, nothing moving. So we're sitting there, and you can see in the other cars, they're going, that's Diego Maradona and Ozzy. No, can't be there. They must be warming up on the pitch. Anyway, I've got all this story to file. No mobiles. So as we get into White Hart Lane, I said, Ozzy, you've got to let me out. So I can't sit here any longer. I've done my interview. I've got to get out and file it, which I did. Got out of the car, into the red phone box, pressed button B, and phone it over. Got to the game, time for the second half. No mobiles in those days. Anyway, that's the story. But so I thought to myself, look, you know, how many people have had that amount of time and spoken to them at that great length about a variety of subjects. And of course, I went to the World Cup. The World Cup where it was played against England, and I went to the World Cup in the States where he was drug tested, and I went to the press conference when he was banned. I had quite, I still think, a good connection with him, enough to write a proper book with an inside track about him.
Excellent. And like you say, not many people have had that opportunity to speak to him at that, at that great length and ask him those questions. And I think none in the back of Ozzy's car. Yeah, no, that's right. With Ozzy Ardiles as the translator, don't think many people have had that opportunity. Just to finish us off then, because look, I could speak to you, Harry, and listen to your stories for 3 hours easily. I could easily do it. But I'm trying to keep these shows to an hour regardless. We're trying to keep them short and sweet to make the people want more. But I do want to talk to you about your book, The Red Cards to Racism. Is that your most recent book?
Well, the most recent is the Maradona one,
right,
a couple of months ago. But this one is out on the 15th of April.
That's right.
And it's available pre-order now on Amazon.
So obviously, that racism within sport, racism within the world has been a hot topic for the last probably, it's timeless subject, sadly, but it's particularly been a hot topic within football over the last few years again. Was that the kind of what instigated you to write this book, or was it something that you had planned previously?
Well, you can see it. You can see it there. That is a letter from Neil Kinnock in 1990, praising myself and the Daily Mirror for being the first people to ever raise the fact there was racism in English football. 1990.
Jesus.
And I've got to tell you, I don't think anything has changed. It's just, well, I don't think anything has changed. I think the method of the abuse has changed, obviously, from the physical abuse that the supporters would give you inside the stadium to the social media abuse. Many of the players I interviewed, one of them actually said to me, the modern players who are complaining and every right to complain and should be complaining and raising these issues on the social media abuse is appalling. It doesn't compare to what we used to get physically and verbally abused inside our own grounds.
Roger.
So it is from first-hand experience. I thought it was worth writing this book, and I've interviewed many people. I think people will be shocked by some of the interviews that have been given in this book.
Yeah.
And I can only tell you, for example, there was someone at the highest possible level at the Football Association who travelled to places, and we've got England in World Cup qualifiers in places like Albania, and we still see that kind of abuse in Eastern Europe as well, and the kind of pitiful punishments that UEFA and FIFA hand out. When he raised the issue many, many years ago, he was told by country's top officials, well, I don't know what you're moaning about. That's part of the course. You shouldn't complain. The person I'm talking about was actually Jewish, and one of the UEFA officials said to him, I wonder why Hitler didn't finish the job.
No.
And asked him why he chose to be Jewish. Did you choose to be Jewish? Is it because you get extra holidays?
Jesus Christ. This, if you've got someone from UEFA with that attitude saying appalling things like that, nothing will ever change ever. Because the people at the very top...
That illustrates why it won't change.
It's, Jesus, that's really shocking.
I think the book will shock you.
Yeah, I am most definitely going to read it, and maybe we can get together again and talk about it once I've read it. I'd really like that if you've got the time, because that's one which I'm gonna order that now, actually. But like I said at the start of the show, Harry, there is so much that you've achieved and so much that you've done throughout your career and your life. It's difficult to fit all that into an hour, so I've tried to touch on as much as I can. Well, but also I really enjoy listening to you, talk about your experiences and your stories.
Well, if you want to do a follow-up on it, I haven't told you the stories about Johan Cruyff, Elton John, wow. Many about Robert Maxwell. There's quite a few. So
yeah, maybe we should do a part 2 if you'd be up for that. I'd be quite interested in doing a second part.
more than happy to.
That'd be amazing. Right, Harry, it's been an absolute pleasure as ever. Guys, I encourage you to check out Harry's books. They're all available on Amazon. I will drop some links in the description below to the most recent books, the Maradona book and the Show Racism, the Red Card book, which is out on the 15th of April. Incredible work. And I also urge all football fans, but particularly Cardiff City fans, read the book about Emiliano Sala, and you'll be shocked by the actions of certain people. But what I love about that book, Harry, is it's all factual. There's no speculation. It is purely based on fact and things that happened. Unfortunately, that's going to upset certain people at certain times, but that is the way of life. Guys, you can subscribe to youtube.com/Ace Podcast Nation, and of course, spread the word. Follow us on social media, and we'll be back next Sunday for another episode of My Story. And of course, we have a live football show every Monday, and we have a live championship show every Friday. And we also do MMA and boxing and all sorts with special guests and some of the biggest names in the UK. But until then, we bid you farewell. Harry Harris, it has been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure too.
I got tons of soul on my true collectible. Famous, so famous, #1 desirable. I do what I want when I want and how I want it. Leave you with the one in the air, that's how I roll. I got tons of soul on my true collectible. Famous, so famous, #1 desirable. I do what I want when I want and how I want it. Leave you with the one in the air, that's how I roll. I got change to throw, I don't care about no gold. Better, so much better, flipping incredible. Always on the show, so they know that I still got it. And I never feel sorry, yeah, top of the world. Top of the world. Yeah, top of the world. Top of the world. Yeah, top of the world. Top of the world. Yeah, top of the world. Top of the world. Yeah, top of the world. When I hear him come like my fuse and then ba-bum. Later, see you later, I'm about to blow this